How confident are you in the State Department's vetting process when it comes to Chinese nationals in this country?
I want to be clear, as I said in my opening, that our concerns are not just with all Chinese nationals. Our concern is with the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese government. And the Chinese government has shown a willingness to leverage insiders who have no origins in China, for example. So vetting is a very important part of our resilience and our national security, but it's not sufficient in its own right.
So your concern is with the leverage. They could do that with Chinese nationals. They could use it with other individuals as well. What kind of leverage are you seeing right now the Chinese Communist Party using in this country?
I'll give you one example. So GE Aviation, a major public, very sophisticated company, entered into a joint venture with, it wasn't a Chinese company, but the Chinese were able to recruit an insider at the joint venture. The joint venture was then able to get access to sensitive GE information, which then he used to help Chinese intelligence officers back in China hack GE's systems. So you had the joint venture, which enabled the recruitment of the insider, which enabled the cyber hacking, and then for extra credit, the guy was able to essentially cover the tracks because of his insider access. Now, fortunately, there's a happy ending to that story. It also shows that if a company as sophisticated and big as GE can fall prey to this, what company couldn't?
One thing that came out of the hearing yesterday and was reinforced by the testimony of the FBI director is that we need to ban or force a sale of TikTok. The threat in terms of the manipulation or collection of our data, as well as TikTok being a dominant news platform controlled by the Chinese Communist Party that could spread disinformation, is too severe. So we have to take action on that now. Another thing we can do is to prevent American investment in Chinese technology companies, particularly cyber companies that are doing things designed to destroy America. But ultimately, this is a human problem. We need to do a better job of using the creative authorities we've already given the Pentagon and CISA in order to recruit the best and the brightest in cyberspace to work with the federal government to defend our networks, to defend our grid, so that our humans attacking this problem are simply better than the people that China is using to get after this problem.
Director Wray, you explained that TikTok is beholden to the Chinese Communist Party, which can access users' private personal data, influence their feeds. Earlier this month, Cloudflare reported that Taiwan experienced a 3,000% increase in distributed denial of service cyber attacks last quarter. 3,000%. I imagine that's a coincidence with their election. So the Chinese Communist Party has shown a willingness to influence elections. I'm heartened by the experience and competence of the federal government in protecting the integrity of our election system. But just to understand, if the CCP were to want to change TikTok feeds to bias one candidate or another in the upcoming presidential election, would they be able to do so?
My understanding is that under Chinese law, that would be something that they would be permitted to do.
And we already know they influence Chinese children to study science and math. Could they be able to suggest to American kids that they use more drugs?
Again, my understanding is that the Chinese government and the Chinese Communist Party, if it wants to exercise that authority, can easily exercise that authority.
General Nakasone, China describes its cyber efforts as proceeding along 4 vectors: deterrence, reconnaissance, offense, and defense. Deterrence, how do they think about deterrence, and how do we think about deterrence in response?
So in terms of the way that we think about it, Congressman, is we think about it deterrence by denial and deterrence by cost imposition. Deterrence by denial is what we're discussing here in terms of publishing and being able to expose what the Chinese are doing in an unclassified manner. This is the difference. This is the challenge China now faces. We have uncovered what they're doing, and we will continue to do that.
When you appeared in October on 60 Minutes, you mentioned you had seen a variety of efforts by Chinese businesses attempting to acquire businesses, land, and infrastructure in the United States in a way that presents national security concerns. I saw that, and I thought that was a very powerful statement. I followed up with a letter to you outlining some concerns I had about an investment in my own district. In my own district, there's a company, Goshen, which is a CCP-affiliated company. It's worked with the PLA, and many of its top leaders, including the leader of its North American operations, have ties to the CCP. Goshen is wanting to build an electric vehicle battery factory in my district, and it's been given hundreds of millions of dollars in federal, state, and local tax dollars to do so. To build and operate its factory in my district, Goshen plans to bring 20 to 50 Chinese nationals to Michigan If that happens, how confident are you that it will not be used for espionage? In other words, do you believe there's a risk these individuals will be spies working in the United States?
What I can tell you is that a lot of this ultimately traces back to the blurry, if not non-existent, line between the Chinese government and its private sector, and the Chinese government's ability to, should they choose to leverage that authority, that reach, that access, in a way that undermines our national security, which is why acquisitions, buying land, buying businesses, and so forth, while maybe legal, can still raise national security concerns because it provides a vehicle for them to, if they want to leverage that access, to conduct surveillance or other operations that undermine our national security. And we've seen time and time again where they have used that access, leveraged that access to do that. And in a way, it ties into the operation that we're here talking about this morning, which is leveraging in a different sense. The access is the problem. We don't want to wait until they've actually stolen whatever the information is. We need to try to get, as they say in the counterterrorism context, left of boom.
I'm also very concerned about the CCP prepositioning within our critical infrastructure like oil and gas pipelines. Give me a reason why someone would preposition in those critical infrastructure, and what conclusion should we reach as Congress and the American people from these reports?
This is an attempt to provide the Chinese options in crisis or conflict. When we have discovered them in these critical infrastructures, the first thing that we need to do is to make sure that we get them out. And the second thing is that we need to have a vigilance that continues onward. This is not an episodic threat that we're going to face. This is persistent. This is the generational piece that Director Wray talked to. We have to operate every day. We have to have a vigilance. We have to have offensive and defensive capabilities.
What makes the PRC activities like embedding latent malware into systems, what makes it unique in relation to other responsible cyber actors?
Responsible cyber actors of democracies like our own do not target the civilian infrastructure. There's no reason for them to be in our water. There's no reason for them to be in our power. This is a decision by an actor to actually focus on civilian targets. That's not what we do.
I would argue, too, it's not just about us playing defense, because we will never get out in front of the insidiousness that happens with cyber attacks and those folks that dream up ways to attack our system. But one thing that we can do very effectively is to have a very robust offensive capability as a deterrent. First of all, do we have the capability to do that? And if so, do we communicate that in various ways so that China knows what the consequences will be if they take such an action?
We do have the capability, and we're very, very good, the best. And in terms of the way that we communicate it in many different ways. From our policymakers who have these discussions, to the exercises that we conduct, to the real-world examples that we do with a series of different partners. First of all is that we have discovered what they're doing, and we have exposed it. Secondly, the partnerships that exist here between our agencies and our commands is something that concerns the Chinese. And finally, it's the work with the private sector that gives us scale. They may have 50 to 1, but when we have the private sector, we outnumber them.